So that left the scientific community with something that very few science guys want to talk about. It left the scientific community with all of the information. There is nothing more to be learned about the glycosidic bond. We know where all the electrons are. The question then becomes how did the letters get in this order? If you're willing to admit that the order of the letters is important and that it's a language, then the next question is, how did they get in this order? Now, the guy who won the Nobel Prize for describing the DNA double helix, Francis Crick, has written hundreds of research articles, published dozens of different molecular biology textbooks. His proposal was a scientific, in quotes, concept that existed in textbooks when I first started teaching here. All the freshman Campbell textbooks that kids take from the 113 through 116 series had as part of this explanation Francis Crick's explanation, the concept called panspermia, in which he suggested that aliens seeded life on this planet. Now I see some of you smiling as though you're smirking as though that's so stupid. Y'all, look up the sci-fi movies that are out about where life came from. It had an impact on our culture. Crick's idea about the DNA Human Genome Project and where the order of the letters come from had an impact on our culture, and has had now for a couple of decades. When you look into space for things, they find, can we use some examples? What about the Transformers series? These 4 creator types that made the Transformers somewhere else, the aliens. How about the Jodie Foster series where she did this? They had a machine they discovered that took them to other planets where there were creators. How about the Star Trek series where they break through the Great Barrier and find the aliens that created life? I mean, on and on you could go. Just pay attention to it as you're seeing it now. The impact of the science on the movie industry, finding aliens. You smirk. Whenever Richard Dawkins was interviewed by Ben Stein in the movie, the name of the movie, Expelled. He interviewed him at the end, and he took him through this. And he said, he didn't say glycosidic bond. This was for non-science people. This is for you, right? You know this information because it's so important. He said, well, how do you explain the fact that, basically, I'm paraphrasing in Wade Warren language, that the order of the letters in the DNA molecule? Dawkins responded to him, he is the most famous atheist in the world. His most famous book is called The God Delusion. And he said in that book, and to Ben Steiner in that interview, well, I'm willing to concede that somebody did this. Something did this. But it was most certainly not God. It was probably some far advanced civilization, culture, in some other location. And that civilization also evolved from nothing. And then they seeded life here. So you can see where this goes, right? There's no way to disprove that. I can't prove to somebody that there are not aliens in this vast universe. But you can see where this kind of science information leaves an individual. It's where, that's why I take the time with it in the first week of this class. It crosses the border, right? We have moved out of science into philosophy. And if you think philosophy is absent in science, oh my goodness, you have not read a science textbook. Because the philosophy here is creating all kinds of nightmares for the scientific community at large, which has as part of its dogma that there is no God. There is no creator. So I would say to you guys, at this point you have a decision to make. The glycosidic bond is nonspecific, and we know this. Something put this language in the cell. The chemistry did not. Somebody wrote this language. So who you think wrote it now becomes a matter of your own personal philosophy, right? You got to make that decision. But don't tell me that there is no evidence of a creator in the structure of the organic macromolecules. Wade Warren, the pitiful little A&P guy at Louisiana College, is not the only person who knows about this. But your science books are not going to tell you this. Can you see why? It makes science guys uncomfortable to say there might be a God who made this. We're not allowed to say that in science, right? We leave the religion guys to say stuff like that. But it's unavoidable. When you get to the base structure of DNA, it is unavoidable. Now, let me give you an illustration that will help you with this. I'm going to go back to the ATP thing, but I want to use the illustration here. I have quotes here from Collins and Crick so that you can read them for yourself. And I have an illustration for you. Because what people like me, so I was involved over the past year. I was asked to be on the steering committee for the state of Louisiana in rewriting the Louisiana Science Standards for public schools. And they're really good. And my daughter's teaching third grade. All her science standards have changed, and they're fantastic. Before it was a whole scope of things, try to get it all in. Now they're just going to slow down and let's get deep with them. And so I love the way they've done it. However, in the section starting with the 8th grade through high school, there is nothing in there that has anything to say about the significance of the Human Genome Project, the discovery of the DNA sequence of base pairs. They have to learn it, but then they are told as part of that this is a unity of life. There's nothing in there about sudden appearance in the fossil record, nothing in there about weaknesses in the Darwinian model. And a group out of Baton Rouge asked me to be on the committee, on the steering committee, and so I agreed. And when the standards came out and they asked us on the steering committee to evaluate them, I confronted them at a public meeting in New Orleans. I confronted faculty at LSU and Nichols and Northwestern and Louisiana Tech with this information. I brought with me a packet of more than 1,000 scientists worldwide. You know, real scientists, not like me. Real guys from Harvard and Stanford and Penn and Yale and famous at Oxford. Very famous guys who have all signed a statement that say, we are skeptical of the current claims of the Darwinian model to explain life. Now, it doesn't matter if I sign a statement like that. I work at a Christian school, and they think it's great that I think there's a God around here. Not so at a public institution. And so I challenged these people on camera to offer me an explanation for things like this. And I got silence followed by anger. Now, if you want to see it, you want to see what this looks like in the mind of people who want to resist the idea that we have a creator, you can go to the Louisiana Department of Education website from February the 13th of this past spring and watch the video live. Now, that wasn't enough. I got outvoted. I was the only dissenting vote on the committee because the entrenched atheism in our public system is striking. So I went to Baton Rouge when the standards were being discussed before the Board of Elementary, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, called BESE. And the Superintendent of Education's up there. And I sat there. They gave you 3 minutes to say your piece. So I wrote it out. And I told them just what I told you in 3 minutes. When I was done, another member of the committee came up and offered a rebuttal. And we passed out documents for them. At the end of that, one of the committee members, Dr. Gary Jones, does anybody recognize his name? Who's that? Anybody else know who this is? He's the former superintendent of schools in Rapides Parish, right? And he's the number 2 guy now on BESE. Because of his involvement in the community, he knows me. Now, we're not friends, but he knows who I am. He knows about the students who come out of our program here and how well they're educated. So he said, at the end, he said, I'd like for Dr. Warren to come back to the microphone, and I'm going to read some of the rebuttal statements. So he invited the other woman to come down who wrote it, and I want you two to sit there, and we're going to have a little conversation here. So her eyes got real big. I jumped up and ran down to the microphone. So he begins to ask her questions about her rebuttal. And the first series of questions gets to this. She turns to the audience and says, can I ask for some of my science friends to come down and help? He said, no, you're the one that wrote this. You talk about this. And I said, well, I can help her. And so I started talking about Collins and Gould and these other evolutionary biologists who have admitted to this. And we're not telling our public schools kids about it. Why not? Why are we hiding this information? And so after I got finished, one of the board members on BESE suggested that we add language to the front of the standards that would allow the public teachers who wanted to use the peer-reviewed literature to teach the students that, in fact, the Darwinian model does have legitimate problems. I floated out of the room. I got my behind whipped, right? But in the final analysis, it's on tape now in this state. And public teachers who want to know can now get the information and give it to their kids if they want to. I'm very passionate about this. I'm 50 years old now, and I've had it. Why can we not tell kids the truth? It makes me crazy. So here's the illustration that'll help. By language, I mean